I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I figured I'd share them here. See, I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way I've seen some things that I think you guys would be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff, and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old saying, "Stay where you are," and they don't wander off. But I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases that I get called in on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his little sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched the area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to her mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she'd never come back down. They waited by the base of the tree for hours, calling her name, before they called for help, and again we searched everywhere. We never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could have possibly gone, because neither her mother or grandpa ever saw her come down. A few times I've been out on my own searching with the canine. They've tried to lead me straight up cliffs, not hills, not even rock faces, straight sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling. And in those cases, we usually find the person on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where the canine led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange. One particularly sad case involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. It was a complete freak accident, but I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what had happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into the ambulance, and she let out the most haunting, heartbreaking wail I've ever heard. It was like her whole life was crashing down around her, and a part of her died with her daughter. I heard from another search and rescue officer that she killed herself a few weeks after it happened. She couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. I was teamed up with another search and rescue officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get where we figured he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevice with a broken leg. It wasn't pleasant. He'd been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was very obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he'd been doing fine. And when he got into the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment. He was wearing a parka and ski pants. He walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which was why he had fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night, climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible muffled screams. This story bothered the hell out of me. I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it. One of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out late at night because the dogs had picked up her scent. When we found her, she was curling up under a large rotted log. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking us why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone. So we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock, but the closer we got to base, the more agitated the woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point, she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, she said, and she wouldn't give us to him. We finally got her to keep moving, but we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deep. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe it. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman turns to me. Her eyes are about as wide as I can imagine a human could possibly open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar. I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing right next to my ear, and I just about jump out of my skin. I hustle her to ops, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say, I was really happy when we left the area that night. This is the last one I'll tell. That's probably the weirdest story I have. No, I don't know if it's true in every search and rescue unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other search and rescue officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it to our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't even seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking about like 30 or 40 miles, at some point we'll find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some. The other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told very emphatically that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them because they happen so frequently. There's been an overwhelming amount of people mentioning the similarity between some of my stories and those of David Pauld's. I assure you, I'm not trying to rip him off in any way. I've got nothing but respect for the guy. He's actually what inspired me to write this because I can verify a lot of these things he talks about. We do have a lot of these strange missing persons cases, and most of the time, they aren't solved. Either that or we find them in places they have no business being. I personally haven't been on many calls like that, but I'll share a few that I've seen and a story my friend told me that relates to this. There was a lot of feedback about the stairs, so I'll touch on that briefly here, and I'll also include a story. They come in a variety of shapes, sizes, styles, and conditions. Some are pretty dilapidated, just ruins, but others are brand new. I saw one set that looked like they came from a lighthouse. They were metal and spiral, almost old-fashioned. The stairs don't go up infinitely or farther than I can see, but some sets are taller than others. Like I said before, just imagine the stairs in your home as if someone had cut and pasted them in the middle of nowhere. I don't have any pictures. It's never really occurred to me to try after the first time, and I don't really feel like risking my job over it. I'll try again in the future, but I can't really promise anything. A few people expressed confusion about the guy who ran into the man with no face. And just to clarify, when the climber ascended and reached the top of the peak, he saw another man in a parka and ski pants. This was the man with no face. Sorry about any kind of confusion with the wording of that story. Try to avoid that in the future. As far as missing persons go, I'd say that about half the calls I get are related to that. The other are rescue calls. People who fall off cliffs, hurt themselves, get injured by fire. You wouldn't believe how often that happens, mostly drunk kids. Getting bitten or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team. We have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently, he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one of those out on the trail. And before you ask, I have no idea why he thought that it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go out with him. I don't ask about these kinds of things because past a certain point, it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and that's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure that we covered as much ground as possible. Suddenly a call comes over the radio telling us all to head back towards the vet's location. We come right away because this usually means the missing person is injured. We need a full team to help him find his way out to safety. We meet back up, and the vet's just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. And I ask my buddy what's going on. He points up into the branches of the tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. But there's a walking stick, dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. A little strap thing on the handle has been looped around the branch. It's just hanging there. Now, there's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far. We don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off, because there are other calls we have to attend to. And past a certain point, there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we'd found her husband. It was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think that it was just the sheer improbability of it, that the questions that were raised. How the hell did this guy's Caine end up there? Did someone kill him and toss that up there? Is this some kind of weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. Missing kids are the most heartbreaking. Doesn't matter the circumstance. It's never easy. And we always dread the ones we find deceased. It's not common, but it does happen. David talks a lot about kids, search and rescue teams, things that they find that shouldn't be or couldn't be. I could honestly say that I've heard about this kind of thing happening more than I've seen it. But I'll share one of the ones that I think a lot about, one of the ones that I've witnessed, personally. A mother and her 3 kids were out for a picnic in an area of the park that has a small lake. One is 6, one is 5, the other's about 3. She watches them all really closely, and according to her, she never lets them out of her sight at any time. She never saw anyone else in the area, which is important. She packs their stuff up, and they start to head back to the parking area. Now, this lake is only about 2 miles into the woods, and it's on a very clearly established trail. It's almost impossible to get lost getting from the parking area to it, unless you're deliberately going off the path like an imbecile. Her kids are walking in front of her, and she hears what sounds like someone coming up the path behind her. She turns around, and in the 4 or so seconds that she's not looking, her 5-year-old son vanishes. She figures that he stepped off the trail to pee or something, and she asks her other 2 where he went. They both tell her that a big man with a scary face came out of the woods next to them and took the kid's hand and led him into the trees. The 2 remaining kids don't seem upset. In fact, she says later that it seems like they've been drugged. They sort of seems spacey and fuzzy, so of course she freaks out and starts looking frantically in the area for her kid. She's screaming his name. She says at one point she thinks she heard him answer her. Now obviously, she can't go blindly running into the woods. She's got the other 2 kids. She calls the police and they send us out immediately. We respond and we start the search for him. Over the course of the search, which spans miles, we never find a single trace of the kid. Canines can't pick up a scent. We don't find any clothes or broken bushes or literally anything that would signify a child being there. Of course, there's suspicion about the mother for a while, but it's pretty clear that she's completely destroyed by the whole thing. We look for this kid for weeks, with a lot of volunteer help, but eventually, the search peters off, and we have to move on. The volunteers keep searching, though, and one day we get a call on the radio letting us know that a body has been found and needs to be recovered. They tell us the location, and none of us can believe it. We figured that it's got to be a different kid. But we go out there, about 15 miles from the site where he vanished, and sure enough, we find the body of the kid we've been looking for. I've been trying to figure out how this kid got where he did ever since we found him, and I've never come up with an answer. A volunteer just happened to be in the area because he figured he might as well look in places no one else would think of. On the off chance, the body had been dumped. He comes to the base of a tall, rocky slope, and halfway up, he sees something. He looks through his binoculars, and sure enough, it's the body of a little boy stuffed in a little opening in the rock. He recognizes the color of the kid's shirt, and he knows right away that it's the missing boy. That's when he calls it in. We're dispatched. It took us almost an hour to get his body down. None of us could believe what we were seeing. Not only was the kid 15 miles from where he'd started, there was no possible way he could have gotten up there on his own. The slope's treacherous. It's hard even for us in our climbing gear. A 5-year-old boy had no way of getting up there. Of that I'm certain. Not only that, but the kid doesn't have a scratch on him. His shoes are gone, but his feet aren't damaged or dirty, so it wasn't as if an animal dragged him up there. And from what we can tell, he hasn't been dead that long. He'd been out there over a month by that point, and it looked like he'd only been dead for, at most, a day or 2. The whole thing was unbelievably strange. And was one of the most disconcerting calls I've ever been on. We found out later that the coroner determined the kid had died from exposure. He'd frozen to death, probably late at night 2 days before we found him. There were no suspects. No answers. To this day, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail. We saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. The kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered off. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad of because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I headed back, she decided to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there. It's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, she's pointing out places that she found people in the past. I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads that you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on state-protected land, which means that there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or a makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges. And if there's one thing that you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight edges. I pointed out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it. All the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase. In the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would probably be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. Sides aren't carpeted, obviously. And I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch where the house had failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there. It's like my brain is working overtime trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes around and stands next to me. She just stands there casually looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the hell this thing is doing here. She just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start moving closer and she grabs my arm. Hard. I wouldn't do that, she said. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight. I just stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time. But don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't go up them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way that she's looking at me tells me that it's best I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of the training. She was right, though. I'd say about every fifth call I go on, I ended up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches of training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been there for years. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion. Or at least 10 feet wide and steps leading up at least 15 to 20 feet. I tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. It's normal, don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't get too close to them or go up them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer. But it hasn't happened yet. Well, this is another one. One that's less spooky, a little more sad. A young man went missing late in winter. And realistically, no one could be going that far out into the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open years round unless there's a shitload of snow. We didn't opt for them, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was unusually heavy snowfall that year, and we knew that it wasn't likely that he'd find him until spring when the thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened. It scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who ski or snowboard or spend any amount of time on a mountain will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the area beneath the branches. It happens most with the fir trees because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So when you end up with a space around the base of a tree, it's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells. They're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the welcome center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are. But every year that we get an unusual amount of snow, at least one person, doesn't read them, or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find them out about in spring. My best guess is this young man was hiking around and got tired. Or maybe a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in, got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. And unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position like this guy did, even 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down in the freezing cold, he didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible for him to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. And I can't imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I ever seen that goat man thing while I've been out in calls. And unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to chalk it up to the goat man. We got a response that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband's just beside himself. He runs, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her and she passes out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes up to us and starts screaming again. I calm her down and I ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she had said, but essentially what had happened was this. She was waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow. She couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part because it was so weird that I didn't think I could forget it if I tried. It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over, just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him, and the closer he got, the more scared I was, and the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. See, now obviously I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow, meow at people. So once we got down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm going to go search the area to see if I can find anything. He tells me to go ahead. We grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. And I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more. When I head back, I go off the trail and I see a figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point. I don't have any desire to be out at the woods alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm heading back, I start to hear something off in the distance. I stop and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow, meow. This really odd monotone. And as comical as it makes it sound, it's like that guy from the guy on South Park with that electrolarynx. Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions, and eventually it just sorts of fades out. And I ended up going back to the Welcome Center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact same sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people. But even I have to admit, it was weird. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta. Just wanted to say thanks so much for listening. You guys are what makes this channel worthwhile. There'll be new horror stories every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, as well as gaming live streams every Friday and Sunday night. Please help support on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and you can hear me as well as many other creepypasta narrators, live 24/7 at SCRMRadio.com. Sweet dreams.